but you carry on. And then you discover that there were people like the Dutch over here, kids. Perhaps the most motivating element to fight for me was when we liberated this area here. This was a wealthy country before the war. See, farming country, lots of milk, lots of eggs, lots of cheese, lots of happiness. And when we arrived here, the children were starving, bloated, their eyes popping out of their head. Women, kids your age, thin like this, nothing to eat. You've heard a story that they ate the bulbs of the tulips to survive. Well, this then gave us a reason for us to fight, to liberate them as soon as possible.
Then we've got Joe English, Lancaster pilot, an RCAF Canadian in a RAF squadron.
Also, Joe English was my dear friend, the late Joe English, was a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was also another Lancaster pilot.
They were looking right down the barrels of some of these big 88s and just hoping that they wouldn't get to shoot at us, you know.
Now tell me, you're going in low level. What would be your altitude above ground as you're coming in?
Oh, I thought we were around 300 to 500 feet. And we were quite very low, just low enough to miss the church steeples and things like that, you know. Wow. That was my concern and I missed a lot of interesting things because of that. I was too interested in safe flying, missing any obstacles at all.
So these are going to be wonderful interviews. So can you tell us what we have? I know we've got scores of interviews of RCAF veterans that are no longer with us. So this is precious history to us. So tell us about this program and how you'd like to see, as we move into the weeks ahead, these wonderful interviews that we'll have with these veterans.
The show is going to focus on literally the hundreds and hundreds of videos that have been taken over the years by James Blondeau. Many of the people that are in these videos, as you said, are no longer with us.
Yes, well, I've got one veteran, Hank Jackson. I think you've met him. He's DFC. He's the last one I know. He's the last man standing in Calgary, and I go and see him about every 2 weeks. But these classic interviews are absolute RCAF and airmen's golden history. These guys, and I don't think I've ever heard the full story of Ed Carter Edwards being incarcerated in a Nazi concentration camp just because he was an airman. And but being in Buchenwald is like, I can't even imagine it. And so to have him talk about it with us on the program, you know, albeit through an interview, this is going to be great stuff. And remember, Joe English was one of the founders of the Bomber Command Museum in Nanton, Alberta. Yes, so we really treasure his participation as we carry the torch for our veterans. We're trying to get the Royal Canadian Air Force involved at saving some of these interviews of RCAF veterans for the 100th birthday of the RCAF in 2024. So I hope that they will join us in terms of saving history, and we can do it alone, but we would love to have the RCAF with us. I know you're a historian for the RCAF, so I'm really looking forward to these interviews, and we'll be showing these, and you folks can see for yourself the stunning history that's included in these interviews.
You're probably well aware, because being there with me, Joe English was treated as a celebrity at Oshkosh back in 2006.
Yes, I know. And that dropping of the food at the end of the war to the Dutch people who were starving because the German army had taken away all of their food supplies, was very important to saving thousands of Dutch people. And all this food that was dropped from these hundreds of bombers just got them through the most darkest days at the very end of the war. So that's going to be great to hear about Joe English also.
Yeah, the German High Command in the area at the time set up a temporary truce with the Allies to drop the food, and it was a very successful operation. And actually, the Dutch were starving. Many Dutch people had died over the winter. They were forced to eat tulip bulbs as a last resort.
Wow. Now, Chris, can you confirm this? I heard that there were certain football fields and stadiums and acreages in Holland where the bombers were to drop their food supplies, and these were marked. These stadiums were marked by a Pathfinder squadron called RCAF 405 Squadron. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
You see, there's all that kind of history in there that you folks don't know about, and it involves Canadians in the Royal Air Force and everything. And just while Scott is on and listening to Chris and I flap our lips, certainly, Scott, your father was in Bomber Command as a Lancaster pilot, and he was RCAF in a RAF squadron. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was bomb aimer. he was a pilot, but they remustered him as a bomb aimer and sent him overseas. And so he was initially with 100 Squadron out of Waltham, and then they formed 550 Squadron late 43 out of B Flight from 100 Squadron. And so he flew 13 ops in the Phantom of the Ruhr. So anybody who's familiar with the Battle of Britain Memorial flight know that a few years ago it was painted in the livery of the Phantom of the Ruhr, which carried 2 codes. And for those folks who are eagle-eyed out there, the BBMF Lank carried HWR on the port side and BQB on the starboard side to honor both squadrons, because the aircraft started off with 100 and ended up with 550. So dad did the Battle of the Ruhr and then the Battle for Berlin, and did 13 ops in the Phantom, and he was awarded the DFC for his work over Berlin primarily. And it's funny, you know, I heard a story of a airman the other day who was given the DFM and threw it into the Thames. And I was recalling the other day, my dad never took out his DFC. I didn't know he was awarded the DFC until we were writing his obituary. And
wow.
Yeah, and you know, and I think this was shared. A lot of vets felt the same way. Where, why are you honoring me with a decoration when it's the guys who never came back? They're the ones that should be getting the decorations, you know. So I think it was difficult. I'm proud, but you know, pride is a dangerous thing. We have to be very careful as we do these things that we do, whether it's aircraft recovery or remembering those who have fallen. We don't want to glorify. We want to remember, so that we don't do this again, right? We don't want to send our bravest, best, and brightest to fight and die. We need to avoid that at all costs going forward. But yeah, I'm very proud of my father. You know, he did it because he had to, and he, you know, I don't think he thought it was any amount of daring do. But when I look back and you know, try to get an idea of what he and his you know, his crew went through, amazing, just absolutely amazing. So anyways, yeah, that's my connection and that's my driving force.
Well, yes, thank you for giving that. And I didn't realize that your dad got the DFC for excellence in combat, and you didn't know it till after he had passed. Wow.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
he never really spoke of his experiences. It wasn't until I got to visit his navigator, Dave Knight, who was living out in Seychelles. I dropped in and I spent a couple of days with him, and he told me a bunch of stories that Dad wasn't able or willing to talk about, and that was a wonderful couple of days I spent with Dave. Dave was a phenomenal. They called him the old man. He was the oldest in the crew. We were 32 at the time, and that's pretty old.
oh,
But a
yeah,
very
very old.
quiet, unassuming, but very capable navigator, and very just a phenomenal man. You know, there'll be a documentary on, and they'll talk about the Americans and the Brits, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the effort. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal, but it drives me crazy when other allied nations are forgotten and just kind of glossed over, you know. So whether it's the Aussies, the New Zealanders, the South Africans, Rhodesians, Canadians, you know, we have to remember everybody and all the equipment, not just some, right? It's not all Spitfires and Lancasters, right? We have to try to pay homage to everyone. You know, otherwise you're disrespecting these people, right? You know, you're disrespecting their efforts, and that's why we're here. So when Halifax NA337 was brought back to Trenton back, when was that, Carl?
95, and then they started the rebuild in 96.
So 95, and I don't know if you remember this trip, but we all got in a bus and we drove down to Trenton, and the NA337 was lying in its parts on the hangar floor down there. And on the bus was probably 20, 30 vets, and almost all of them were wearing the silkworm. And Smokey Smith was in there too, as a bit of an oddball. But anyways, I remember on the way back, I got a poster, and I went from seat to seat asking each of these fine gentlemen to sign the poster for me. And what I heard on many occasions was they felt responsible for not ensuring that this history wasn't included in the curriculum of the schools of the day, right, in the 60s and 70s. And I remember, you know, being shocked that they were taking this pretty seriously, right? So similar to the way that my father never talked about what he did, so many vets never did, right? So those stories didn't always get told, and they weren't being pushed into the curriculum and at the schools. So, and I remember that day saying, okay, then I'm going to take on that role. I'm going to do everything I can in my little way to help tell those stories, right? If they're not around or able, you know, I'm going to do my best. So, and here we are, Carl, right? So the story continues, but that was, I just thought that was, you know, apropos to the discussion we were having on telling that history, right? And making sure the current generations know about it, right?
Sure. And I can add something to Chris. What you said was, I went to check the high school in my little town of Nanton, Alberta, where the Bomber Command Museum is. And I asked to see the history books that they're teaching their students with in the high school. And it was a powder puffed, the World War II, Canada won a huge contribution to Allied victory, Air Force, Navy, Army. And it was a powder puff, sugar coated, and Canada participated in World War II. Well, excuse me, folks, every bomber that launched from England to pound the Nazis into submission, and we're looking at Scott Knox, whose father was one of those. He was a Canadian in a British bomber. One out of every 7 airmen that launched from England to pound the Nazis was a RCAF Canadian. And it's huge, the contribution of the RCAF and the Canadians to World War II. And our schools, school boards, school districts, they are doing a disservice to the sacrifice and the respect. So those of you folks that end up seeing our promo, you gotta come back and see these great interviews, Saved by James Blondeau, hosted by Chris Charland, and we will educate you to the honor, excellence, and sacrifice of the Canadians, Bomber Command, and all of our people who helped bring victory in World War II.